Okay, this is AP, and we just talked about the test, which is a test review. We're taking off a couple of poems, The Sick Rose and London 1802, and that test is on Wednesday. We're looking at the sheet that has On His Blindness and An Altered Look About the Hills. So let's say there are no questions with it. What I have after this is another poem. Both of these have biblical allusions in them. I'm going to give you a poem that has a literary allusion. So it's a reference to another work of literature. That's also quite common. And again, the more you are alerted to these things, your job is to find meaning in the poems before you write about them. So an altered look, this is Emily Dickinson. Anybody know anything about Emily Dickinson? We're going to spend some time. We'll do several poems about her later.
Was her work published after her death?
Yes. I'd say over 2,000 of her poems were published over about a 70-year period after her death. So she was not well known. She did have a handful of poems published, but she was also ahead of her time. And personally, she was a recluse. You know anything about her family was great, very prominent family. Sort of stood out in some ways, but she stood out more than anybody else. She became a recluse, and nobody knows why. So something happened that caused her. So this is typical of her, I suppose. I guess one difference is, well, normally she didn't rhyme her poems with full rhyme. She also she used something called free verse. You know what that is? Free verse does not have a meter, and it does not have a rhyme, except maybe slant rhyme, which is, you'll see here, a little bit of both. So let me read it to you, and see if we can figure out first where the biblical allusion is, and what it adds to the meaning of the poem. She never titled her poems, so the title of the poem is the first line. That doesn't add a lot to your interpretation. The poem we did the other day, or On His Blindness, adds a lot, because it just refers to it indirectly, but never so directly as the title. So here's An Altered Look About the Hills. An altered look about the hills, a Tyrian light the village fills. A wider sunrise in the dawn, a deeper twilight on the lawn. A print of a vermilion foot, a purple finger on the slope, a flippant fly upon the pane, a spider at his trade again. An added strut in Chanticleer, a flower expected everywhere, an axe shrill singing in the woods, fern odors on untraveled roads. All this and more I cannot tell. A furtive look you know as well, and Nicodemus' mystery receives its annual reply. So I think a good warm-up to this would be to close read this. Go back through it again and see what you can find. Lots of imagery. So if this were, has imagery and a biblical allusion, those would be the primary devices used. But go back and see if you can make any sense of it. That's your job always, to figure out what the meaning is. And of course, you even start with speaker and audience and setting. Don't know if all those are going to help you as much here. That would have helped you more with On His Blindness. But take a few minutes to go back through it. And this is where, again, I think you make your A, ultimately, or your 5, or your 9 on the essay, is the practice. So give it a good effort. See what you can find in it. don't know how much more time you need. Again, it's a great exercise. Someone want to tell us about the biblical illusion? And remember, this is how illusions work. One name. One name. That's all you are expected to, if you're going to get it, to look it up or figure it out that time.
Is Nicodemus the one that asked Christ how to be reborn?
Yes. Say it again?
How
What?
to be reborn?
Did you say reborn? Yeah, right. Because we all know how we were born. It's the second born, because Jesus said, unless, truly, truly, I say to you, unless a man is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Yeah,
And then does Nicodemus say, like, how does someone climb back inside his mother's
That's
womb
right.
and be reborn?
that's right. He says, how can a man be born when he's old, again, when he's old? Or, get back into the mother's room. And Jesus, it's so patient. He says, truly, you know the rest. Well, truly I say to you, unless he is born of water and spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of flesh is flesh, that which is born of spirit is spirit. Do not marvel, do you, that I say, that's a little chastisement. Don't marvel that I say to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from, where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. So he asked the question, how do you get born again? What does that have to do with whatever the poem is about? Yeah.
The poem seems to be about spring and the changing of the season into spring.
Okay, how did you know that?
It talks about animals, which a lot of poems that are talking about spring do. The flowers are blooming, longer days after winter, and with the Nicodemus thing, being born again is a sign of spring.
Yeah, nature is being reborn. Good. And I think it'd be worth looking at some of those images, but yes.
I just like the way that it says receives its annual reply. He's like saying that once a year, the same thing is born over and over again.
So how does nature answer the question? I mean, it may seem obvious, we all know the story, but would anybody articulate that? How does nature answer the question, how can man be reborn? Because we see that nature is being reborn, but how does nature answer that question? Does it answer Nicodemus's question? How can a man be reborn? You just talked about nature, but how does that relate to me? So, anybody want to answer that? You notice what I'm doing? I'm asking the question. That's the only way you're really going to become, better at analysis is to be inquisitive. Just the more questions you ask, the more material, the more answers you'll get. You have something to work with. Yeah.
Well, I guess an answer to that would be maybe that a lot of people are able to see God through nature, and that's how they know that God is true. And so then they're gonna look deeper into that, and then maybe see that the only way to be reborn is through Christ, and it's through God using through nature.
Okay, very good. You said, what is that? I had it on my mind until you said, what is the first thing you said about?
That a lot of people see God through nature.
All right, so that's the first step. It's called general revelation. So you can see the character of God in Revelation. Can I just press it a little bit? But if I'm Nicodemus, or maybe I'm just your next door neighbor who doesn't believe in all this, and he says, well, how do you get born again? And even Jesus' answer requires some thinking, which we don't want to, love to, but we're not going to get into. He talks about water. You have to be born of the water and the Spirit, and that gets into some theology. But what does the poem tell us beyond that? How does that help us? And you mentioned it points us to Christ. How does it do that? You're right. You got us going here, but before we leave it, how does looking at nature, knowing that spring comes around every year, how does it help me? You're telling me, Jesus, I'm supposed to be born again. How do those two link together? How does one answer the other? Maybe you answered this. I'm just reading, asking for. So how do they go together? Yeah.
Like Jesus is the nature of Jesus, that he's gonna allow everyone who goes to
said that earlier. The answer is Jesus. You know, they say, well, that's not an answer. Yes, it is. The answer is Jesus. He can do, what Nicodemus says impossible, and, you know, Clay pointed out that, and think about Nicodemus's question. How can a man get back in his mother's womb? So what's wrong with his thinking? He said reborn, yeah, I mean, what's wrong with that thinking?
He's thinking too literally. He's not thinking of it in terms of spiritual. He's thinking literal, physical.
And what good would that do anyway, if you could do that? Which, I mean, it's ridiculous, but if a man could get back in his mother's womb and be born again, he would just be twice as sinful as he was the first time. Because you're born in sin, you're gonna be the same person, just getting born again, the process of being born, that doesn't help you any. If you could do it, it's an absurd reaction to it. So, you know, Jesus is trying to point you to some other direction. Any other thoughts about that? I like what you just said, because that sort of puts it in perspective. It's impossible. You gotta look to me, you know. So, and she doesn't go into any theology, but it can be done. Just let's wait 6 months. Don't tell me it can't be done. Every year you see that it can be done. So that's the first thing. You gotta get over your unbelief that it can't happen. But the way you're saying it can't happen. No, you can't get back in. That wouldn't help you out. It wouldn't make any better. So, good. I mean, how many, did you notice how many, I mean, I was to the point, I counted the images. Did you notice how many there were? I saw 12 images in the poem. Do you know what Tyrian means? I had to look it up. What is a Tyrian light? No, they don't talk down to you. Poets don't put in parentheses their definitions or dumb it down. They expect you to rise up to that. That's why this is so helpful. Why don't you define these? You never know. Tyrian means from Tyre, Tyre. Where's Tyre? Tyre and Sidon. You know where those two places are? Phoenicia, or the Philistines in the Bible, that country that's on the coast east of Israel, was called one time Phoenicia. It was also called the Philistines, Philistia. So they were famous for creating crimson or purple dyes. So that's it. What is vermilion? What color is that? Girls, and they know colors better than guys. I know my wife does. She knows the names of fashion. What is vermilion? It's a color. What is it? Oh, it's bright red, which is a shade of purple.
Close enough.
And it's got purple finger. What's flippant? A flippant fly. Disrespectful. If you're flippant, you have an answer that sounds a little disrespectful. Chanticleer, you know Chanticleer law? Yeah, you know this one. Canterbury Tales. So what is a Chanticleer? Rooster. Did you know that Coastal Carolina Chanticleers are the number 20 football team in America? Coastal Carolina. They won a national championship in baseball one year. So if anybody's considering, I don't know what they do down there. I don't know what you would get if you went to school there, but they have a pretty formidable athletic program. And furtive. What's furtive? Furtive answer, write it down. Done by stealth or slyly. I don't get that. Anybody want to venture a guess? It's a furtive look you know so well.
Wait, what word?
Furtive. All right, anyway, maybe that warmed you up for this. This you can do before we leave. We won't be able to talk about it. Wednesday we do have that test, so let me give it to you. This is based on a literary illusion, which is on the back page. I've included, let me see if I did. No, I'll have to add that. But we'll explain the literary illusion by Thursday when we get together. Remember, the reading is not due till Monday this week.
Thank you.
It's a little longer. You're gonna need the extra time. But I think it's the best part of the book.
Wait, when's the next chapter? Oh,
Mr. Powell.
Thank you. Out, let me just tell you, now you can go ahead and note this, even though you probably don't know what it is a reference to Macbeth.
Oh.
Lady Macbeth died in Act 5 of Macbeth, and Macbeth has this famous speech, out, out, brief candle. That would help you if you knew it. But I'm gonna ask you to read it, and there are some questions at the end. So I think you have time to do it. If we have time, I'll give you the answers to the question.
How long ago was Robert Frost alive?
He was of course, American. He was 20th century. I think he was born in the late 1800s, but he's known in the early 20th century. You'll see a lot of him on the AP year after year.
She's a little grotesque.
Gory?
Yeah, a little gory.
Well, I mean, in keeping with the title, that Lady Macbeth's death was too, so. And it also involved hands, that's interesting. She killed somebody, she stabbed the king. Doesn't look like all of you are done. You still have another minute. I'd try to finish it. I have an assignment with this, but I'm gonna ask you to make sure that you're doing the reading. So I'm not gonna ask you to do this other, we'll do it Thursday. Wednesday we have the test, so Thursday we'll come back to this and look at how literary illusions work. But that just, make sure you're spending your time reading, yeah.
When is the fourth chapter due?
I'll be due Monday.
Are we gonna check these?
Yeah, everybody finished? Maybe I don't know, if I have time to read it, let me read them to you quickly. This will be due Monday. I'll make sure you get this up here. All right, if you're ready, let me just read these to you, quickly. What's the first question number?
48.
All right, so 48 is E, 49 is E, 50 is E, 51 C, 52 B is in boy, 53 C, 54 A, 55 D is in dog, 56 D is in dog, 57 B, 58 B.